Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Beyond Second Cognition. I'm Endall Beall. The topic of this discussion is how deep is the swamp? While people are following the Q posts and following things like Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Lou Dobbs and things like that on the Fox News network, there's a lot of distraction about Russia. Russia is not the major problem that we face in this country these days, not in America. The biggest global threat we have for the incursion of Marxist communism is the Communist Chinese. The Communist Chinese own a goodly percentage of Hollywood. And I'll give you an example that you can prove to yourself. Whenever you watch movies about bad guys and terrorist states and things like that, you'll hear about North Koreans and Iranians and maybe Russians. When's the last time or any time that you've seen the Communist Chinese involved in any movie plot? You know why you never see the Communist Chinese named in any movie plot? Because they control the Hollywood studios and they make sure that all of that information is whitewashed from any theme so the American people don't cotton to the fact that it's the Chinese communists that are basically intruding into America, that control the Democrat Party, control the university systems with a lot of money invested through things like the Confucius Institute. And the Chinese have been running an anchor baby operation for decades in this country. And here's how this works. They will send 8-month pregnant Chinese women from the communist China mainland into the U.S., and then they will have a baby here, and then they will get awarded that U.S. citizenship. And then they fly them back to communist China, indoctrinate them in Marxist communist ideology, and then send them back as American citizens so they can infiltrate American businesses, American schools, and American businesses, claiming to be American citizens when they are communist subversive agents operating on our soil at the behest of the Chinese. A lot of you people don't know it, but Communist China now owns the Panama Canal. Their new program has allowed them to loan a lot of money to African countries and Latin American countries. And then when these countries can't repay the loans, once the Chinese communists raise the interest on them, they foreclose on property, like they did on Long Beach Harbor. The Communist Chinese own Long Beach Harbor. They own a goodly percentage of California, which is why you have your Congress people like Nancy Pelosi and Governor Newsom and Governor Brown and all these people dancing to the tune of the Communist Chinese. This is the deep state. They are tied in intimately with the British Fabian Society, which goes back to its formation in 1894. The British Fabian Society created the EU through the Pan-European Agreement that started in 1926. The Road and Belt Project that the Chinese are instituting, the Europeans want to get their hands on. They want to collude with Communist China because the Fabian British Labour Party, which was created by the Fabian Society, are in bed with communist regimes around the world, whether it's Venezuela, it used to be Russia, now it's Communist China, and their prospect has always been global domination. So how deep is the swamp? It's not just dirty Congress people in the District of Columbia. They have infiltrated the American Bar Association, which is mostly a left-wing organization. Through the infiltration of the Bar Association, they have communist activists that wind up sitting on judicial benches, passing down political decisions rather than decisions based in the rule of law, and changing the landscape of the American Constitution. They hide behind the Constitution and say, well, you can't interrupt our freedom of speech. But according to the Gitlow versus New York decision of the Supreme Court in 1925, the First Amendment does not protect sedition. When you are formulating and pushing an ideology, a subversive ideology designed to undermine the Constitution and the rule of law in the United States, that's called sedition, and it's imprisonable for up to 30 years. what has happened is through the control of Congress by the rhino left-wing Republicans masquerading as right-wing Republicans and the Democrats in Congress, is our judiciary system has been loaded with political activists, communist activists. They claim to be liberals or progressives and looking out for the interests of the American people, but what they've been doing is they've been fulfilling a political communist agenda for a long time. Recent news, you hear some of these Marxists in our Congress claiming about stacking the court, but here's the real truth, ladies and gentlemen. The Communist Democrats have controlled the Supreme Court for almost 70 years. And now all of a sudden, President Trump is getting some judicial nominees like Justice Brett Kavanaugh to swing us back to constitutional rule of law. And these communists are screaming like stuck pigs because they're losing the control they have. They control the appellate courts like the Ninth Circuit out in California. And the congressional people are using the courts as an extended branch of the legislative branch. Judges don't rule on law anymore. They dictate policy, political policy, from the bench. So the swamp controls the courts. The swamp controls the American Bar Association. The swamp is the Democrat Party. The swamp is the Republicans in name-only party like the Paul Ryans of the world. And the Chinese just have crept in over the course of the last 40 or 50 years with their anchor baby policy. So this is the deep state. This is how deep it goes. Now, aside from that, you hear about these organizations like Open Source, which is funded and sponsored as a 501c3 corporation by George Soros. How many of you know that there's millions of 501c3s? Again, how many of you know that the 501c3 idea was spawned the same year that they created the Federal Reserve System in 1913, and the same year they put it under the jurisdiction of the Internal Revenue Bureau? The IRS cannot manage and manipulate and control and audit millions of 501c3s who are banned from political activity, yet they do it all the time. In my estimation, the 501c3s are nothing but money laundering organizations to support political candidates as slush funds through supposed donations from who knows where, the George Soroses of the world, who's also driving this global migration agenda. The global migration agenda is backed by the Pope, who is a Marxist, who is steeped in liberation theology and comes from Argentina. Now, a lot of people say, well, Fox News is the only one telling you the real truth. No, they're only telling you part of the truth. A fair percentage of the Fox News reporters are Catholic, and this was patently evident when they wore the ash from Ash Friday on their foreheads to do their news reports when it occurred here a month or so ago. The Jesuit order is a Marxist order that preaches liberation theology that started back in 1953. The Jesuit order and their nunneries are facilitating this migrant invasion from Central America, and these Central Americans have all been steeped in liberation theology, which is nothing but Marxism preached from the pulpit of Latin American Catholic churches. But you won't hear a single reporter on Fox tell you about the Catholic Marxist perfidy, either by the Pope or by the Jesuit priesthood throughout all of Latin America, formulating this communist invasion of our country. So even Fox is very selective in what it reports. So while everybody's screaming about Russia, 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 China is the problem. And the Pope is also working with China to try and increase their Belt and Road program, which is how they wind up with the ownership of a goodly percentage of African countries and Panama and many other Latin American countries, as China loans money, jacks up the interest rates, and then forecloses and claims land of these countries to where they actually own the countries, and they're trying to do the same thing with the United States. So, just looking at the jackasses in Congress, the Communist Democrat Party up there, and thinking that's the deep state, that ain't the deep state, folks. The deep state is global. It's Fabian Marxist communism. It's embedded deeply in the EU and Australia and Latin America, and they're trying to topple the United States too. And this is what President Trump is trying to stop. but which the public can't accept because they're too uninformed and dumbed down by Marxist, communist-controlled educational systems which the Fabian Society took over back in the early part of the 20th century. If you want to learn about Marxist influence in this country, you might read a book put out by a historian in the John Birch Society called To the Victor Go the Myths and the Monuments. It'll give you all you need to know about Marxist intrusion into this country. How many of you know that Marx wrote newspaper articles for a New York paper in this country and they were widely distributed? That the Marxists were very active in the United States prior to the start of the Civil War? That John Brown, who made the raid on Harper's Ferry, was a Marxist. Just like these Marxists are pushing the abortion agenda today, they pushed the abolition agenda back in the 1840s and 50s. If you want to know what the deep state is, folks, it's all around you. They own the businesses, they own the schools, they own the government, they own the tech companies, they control everything. You talk about Google and Facebook and all these, they're in bed colluding with the Chinese, and so is the CIA and the FBI and British GCHQ and Australian intelligence and EU intelligence, and America's fixing to find out that our presumed allies are not our allies and have not been for a very long time. This is why you got to make America great again, because if we don't stop this shit, communism will be the victor in the worldwide conflict and the deep state will win. Sorry to be so hard and sorry to be so fast in this short little report, but if you want some more information on the Communist Chinese, you might check out a channel on YouTube by Epoch Times or Epic Times called Declassified. Just go to YouTube and look up Declassified and listen to some of those reports being aired there about communism and Marxism, and get some history behind you and you'll know who your enemy is. There ain't no such thing as liberals or progressives in this country anymore. They're communists. They've always been communists, and they're hiding behind the Constitution just long enough to destroy the Constitution. So if you give a shit about your Bill of Rights, you better know who your damn enemy is. You better know what their agenda is. You better know their subversive tactics, and you better pull your heads out of your asses because you're about to lose your country. For those of you doing the work, stay the course. Don't give up on yourselves.